Good evening, everyone. Let's give it a few minutes, and I see folks are still coming into the webinar. See that it's a little bit after 7, so let's go ahead and get started. I know some folks are still joining. Welcome to everyone. My name is Kim Day, and I serve on the board of directors of the IDA Georgia branch and am the co-chair of the webinar committee. On behalf of our board of directors and members of the IDA Georgia branch, I'd like to welcome all of you. We're pleased you've joined us this evening. I know many of you are joining us from across the state of Georgia, also from neighboring states, but also from across the country and also in places around the world. So thank you for joining us this evening and welcome. IDA Georgia is excited to present the third webinar in our Dyslexia Knowledge Series. We think you'll learn a lot from our speaker this evening, Dr. Nicole Patton Terry. In case you weren't able to join us, the first webinar in the series was back in February, and it was dyslexia, what it is, and what kind of instruction will help. Our speaker that evening was Dr. Devin Kearns. And then 2 weeks ago, we had our second webinar in the series, and it was what educators need to know about dyslexia training programs, and our speakers that evening were Dr. Jennifer Lindstrom and Dr. Nora Schlesinger. If you were unable to attend those webinars, you can find a link on IDA Georgia's website to a video recordings of the presentations, as well as copies of slide decks and resources provided by our speakers. The link to our website with those resources and that information is going to be in the chat box in just a minute. Tonight's webinar, Florida Center for Reading Research, Advancing Reading Through Science, will provide information on how the Florida Center for Reading Research, or FCRR, has led the field in understanding and addressing reading development, assessment, instruction, and intervention. We're going to learn more about how FCRR harnesses the power of research, innovation, and engagement to ensure that all children learn to read. Before I introduce the speaker, I see that the link is in the chat box to access recordings and resources from our earlier webinars. I want to remind you that there will be a Q&A session at the end of the presentation this evening. If you have any questions for Dr. Patton Terry, please submit them at any time through the chat box at the bottom of your screen. We have a Q&A moderator this evening, Lisa Murray, who is a co-chair of the webinar series, who will be monitoring your questions to pass along to our speaker. Please, again, remember to put your questions in the chat box located at the bottom of your screen. And thank you to those who submitted questions earlier. Lisa already has a copy of those. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker for this evening, Dr. Nicole Patton Terry. On a personal note, I've known Dr. Terry for many years and had the pleasure of collaborating with her on projects here in Georgia, and I'm very pleased to welcome her. Dr. Patton Terry is the Olive and Manuel Bordas Professor of Education in the College of Teacher Education, Director of the Florida Center for Reading Research, and the Deputy Director of the Regional Education Lab Southeast at Florida State University. Prior to joining FSU in 2018, she was an Associate Professor of Special Education and the Founding Director of the Urban Child Studies Center at Georgia State University. Dr. Terry founded and directs the Village at FCRR, a division that takes a collective impact approach to creating and maintaining research partnerships with diverse community stakeholders to promote reading achievement, school readiness, and school success among vulnerable children and youth. She currently serves as an associate editor for the Journal of Learning Disabilities, a board member for the Society for the Scientific Study of Reading, and is a fellow of the American Speech Language Hearing Association. Dr. Terry earned a Ph.D. from Northwestern University School of Communication Sciences and Disorders with a specialization in learning disabilities. She was a special education teacher in Evanston Public Schools in Evanston, Illinois. Dr. Terry's research, innovation, and engagement activities concern young learners who are vulnerable to experiencing poor language and literacy achievement in school. In particular, African American children, children growing up in poverty, and children with disabilities. Her research and scholarly activities have been supported by various organizations, including the National Institute of Child Health and Human Development, the Institute of Education Sciences, the Annie Casey Foundation, and the Spencer Foundation. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Nicole Patton Terry.
Thank you, Kim. You can hear me, right? Make sure my headphones are up.
Yes.
Excellent. I really appreciate you all having me here today. I am going to start sharing my screen, so give me 1 second. And you should see the presentation. Am I right? Or do you see the presenter's mode? It's all okay? You see the presentation?
We see the presentation, yeah.
All right, thank you so much. So thank you for joining us this evening. I am going to apologize in advance if you happen to see any small children running through and fro here with us. I'm here in my home with you this evening, but I'm glad to be here. Georgia certainly holds a special place for me. I was actually born in Alabama, but raised in Atlanta. Moved to Atlanta when I was about 2 years old. So I'm a bit of a Georgia girl. I'm very happy to be here with you representing our hometown. So I want to talk to you about the Florida Center for Reading Research and the things that we're thinking about, things that we're doing to try to advance reading through science. But before I do that, I think it's important for us to stop and consider our current context, because place matters. So let's think about, where are we today? Well, today we are sitting in the middle of a global pandemic. This is the dashboard from Johns Hopkins University. This is their COVID tracker. I actually pulled this picture up today at about 2:20 p.m. as closely as possible. And unfortunately, what you see is that we've had over 3 million deaths as a result of the global COVID pandemic, and we're all still reeling from that. We've hit our 1-year anniversary and passed that 1-year anniversary. And although there's hope on the horizon, there's still many places around the world and in many places locally in our communities, maybe even some of your own communities, where this virus is really still taking a toll on all of us. And it matters to how we are approaching what we're discussing today. We're also sitting at a time in which there has been a significant amount of global and civic unrest in our nation, as well as nationally, as we all begin to reckon with things that have perhaps maybe been left unsaid. It's really been spurred by deaths of unarmed Black men and women in the United States. It's really forced us to reckon with some disparities in our society that have been present, but perhaps we haven't attended to in ways that we needed to. And so we're all here, as well as around the world, having conversations about racism and diversity and equity and inclusion and belonging. And that matters to this conversation we're going to have today. And then, of course, because of the pandemic, we've all had changes in our schooling environments. So this is the first day of school in my home, which was in my home this year. This is my 6-year-old. It was his first day of kindergarten this year, and this was certainly not how I expected us to be spending the first day of kindergarten at my dining room table, but there we were. And I have a middle schooler and a high schooler. And so we all have sort of muddled our way through this year and trying to cope not just with the consequences of this pandemic for our health, but also for the growth and learning of our children, and also for their own well-being, socially, emotionally, and otherwise. And that, of course, has changed how we work. So this is me working at home with my 6-year-old. This is my coworker. And this is our office that we shared many days this year as we try to continue to move forward in the work that we do in the service of children and families, while also trying to keep our families and our homes whole. So all of this is happening at the same time. And it's a fair question to ask, why should we be having this discussion about reading right now, if at all? Quite frankly, there are many other issues deserving of our attention at the moment. So why should we focus on reading right now? Well, because reading and education continues to remains one of our best chances for a more equitable and just society, especially for those of us who are struggling within our society. So for us, it's still a matter of priority, because reading remains paramount to how it is that we push ourselves and how it is that we push the children and families that we serve forward. And we really can't do that without ensuring that all of our children are reading and succeeding in school and then therefore in life. And thankfully for us at the Bordas Center for Reading Research, this is a place where we can lead for change. There might be other areas in our world and our lives where we can do things that make a difference, but this is one place where we can certainly step out and lead and help us all move forward with reading. So what have we been doing at FCRR to address reading? Well, we've been doing quite a bit. FCRR really is a model for the way in which you build a research center within a university that can be responsive to the needs of society. Our little realm is specifically focused on reading, and we make sure that we conduct our science in such a way that it informs research, but it also informs practice and it also informs policy. And so we really are trying to have that trifecta happening. Research is informing practice, and practice is informing policy, and research is informing policy. We really try to make sure that happens, and we try to engage at many levels, locally, nationally, internationally, to try to improve reading and make sure others and our stakeholders are improving reading while making use of science to make those decisions. We have always led with evidence, rigor, relevance, integrity in mind, and we do it in a very interdisciplinary way. FCRR has several core and affiliated faculty who will represent multiple disciplines focused on reading. So we have folks who are social workers and who are clinical psychologists and who are speech language pathologists and who are reading education researchers and developmental psychologists. We look at this problem of how to support a multiple viewpoint, multiple disciplines. And we really try to understand what's happening for the whole child as it relates to reading. And we try to remember that this question that we have as it relates to reading doesn't just belong to us. It's a national problem. It's an international problem. And so the things we learn, the things we do, the things we understand, those can be help to inform what's happening for others here as well as around the world. But in addition, what's happening for others around the world, our colleagues around the world, with their learning can inform what we do here. And so we've always tried to make sure that we're collaborating both nationally and internationally to understand reading as a whole. But evidence is always paramount in what we do. And this notion of evidence-based is a term that, depending on who you are and who's using that term, it's difficult for people to understand. This is the easiest way I think that you might think about, and I hope you think about why we are so insistent that we do our best to make decisions based on evidence. And really because we're talking about children. And when it comes to children, we should be as sure as we possibly can.
Can we even afford this house?
I'm pretty sure we can.
Pretty sure. With Rocket Mortgage, you can be certain. Not pretty sure.
What's the difference?
Let me show you. I'm pretty sure these aren't poisonous. I'm pretty sure these are parachutes.
Mine has a sandwich.
That's mine. I'm pretty sure you do not run. I'm pretty sure you could take Batista down.
You're on.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure this is trending.
I'm pretty sure these hornets aren't the murdering type. I'm pretty sure we can make it.
Certain is better.
Let's go with certain.
Good choice.
When it comes to our children, certain is better. Now, there are things for which we will not be certain. But there are things for which we are getting closer and closer to having enough certainty that we can act, based on the evidence that we gather. And quite honestly, it can be
Can we
it
even?
can be dangerous to act without evidence. There are lots of things that we in human nature claim to do, and ways in which we live our lives, and ways in which we base our decisions, things that we do in our daily lives that aren't based on evidence. Sometimes those things aren't so harmful. For example, the idea that sugar causes hyperactivity. Now, sugar may indeed cause hyperactivity, but we don't have a lot of solid empirical evidence to really suggest that having sugar causes hyperactivity. Now, just because you know that doesn't mean that you're not going to let your kids, or you're going to go ahead and let your kids have some dessert tonight at dinner, right? Just because I know that doesn't mean my 6-year-old isn't going to get a cookie tonight. And it's a decision that I'm making that maybe doesn't have an evidence base, but whether or not he does have a cookie tonight probably won't be too harmful for him today, right? But there are other things that we make decisions on that really don't have an evidence base, and they can be harmful. One of the most popular examples of this is the notion that vaccines cause autism. Right now, our empirical evidence suggests that vaccines do not cause autism. But because that took on some time ago, and it made the rounds in such a way that we actually changed the way we think about vaccination schedules for young children here. And a lot of that movement, a lot of that concern really isn't based in evidence. But it makes a difference. I myself, when my young children had to sit down and think about whether or not I was going to change my vaccination schedule because I was concerned about this issue on vaccines causing autism, even though I myself know the evidence about it, right? So we all are able and act in certain ways that aren't based on verifiable evidence. But evidence matters when it comes to children and when it comes to reading instruction, because we don't have to guess. There's a lot that we know about what can work to ensure that young children are reading. There's a lot that we need to learn to ensure that kids are reading. There are a lot of things we don't know for certain populations of students, about certain contexts for students, the things that we don't know about what's happening in classrooms and in homes. There's things we don't know about students with disabilities, about English language, about children who are multilingual or emerging bilinguals. There's lots of things for which we still need to gain more evidence. But for the places in which we do have evidence, we want to act based on those evidence because we want to increase the odds that we're going to have a favorable outcome for the children that we serve. And we want to do that because we know prevention costs so much less than intervention or remediation later on. And even for children for whom intervention or remediation is necessary, if we know we can target that based on children's needs and not based on remediating a need that shouldn't have existed in the first place, then we can do that. We'll have more resource and availability to make that happen so that all learners are benefiting from the resources and instruction that we have to give them. That's why we want you to act based on evidence. And that's why we at FCRR are doing the best we can to contribute to the evidence base upon which you make your decisions as it relates to reading programs, reading instruction, reading policy, and reading practices. So we have been a part of the incredible advances in reading research over the past 40 plus years for all readers. And we are not done yet. Many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with this very recent article that we published in the Reading Research Quarterly. This was jointly authored by all of the researchers, core researchers at FCRR, and really was the sort of a synopsis of what we think we understand about reading research at this time, and places we think we need to go, places where we need to learn more, and how it is we should use that information to inform what's coming next for reading research. So thankfully, there's more to know. Thankfully, we'll still have a job, and thankfully, we'll still be harnessing this power of research to improve outcomes for children and families. We've also worked to increase the availability of all these evidence-based and evidence-informed interventions, professional development, standards, tools, resources that folks can make use of. You guys many of you, for example, are probably very familiar with our student center activities that are available at fcrr.org. These are activities and lessons that are available and designed to be done in small group instruction centers or in classrooms focused on areas of reading instruction that the evidence suggests are particularly important to demonstrating or to helping children achieve well in school as it relates to reading and writing. This is in particular is a BPK activity, which means it's available or designed for students in pre-K classrooms. Our pre-K classroom activities specifically focus on alphabet knowledge, phonological awareness, oral language, and vocabulary. But what you'll see there when you go and visit, we have nearly 400 activities on our website that are available for free to download and use in your classrooms or in your after-school programs or with your mentors and volunteers who might be out in the community to support children's reading. These are other examples of things that we've developed, whether or not they be available on the What Works Clearinghouse, whether or not they be available through the practice guides that are available there to help folks understand and improve reading outcomes for kids. So in addition to contributing to the research, and in addition to contributing to the availability of resources, we've also informed policy and legislation at the state and federal level to improve reading for all learners. So for example, when the Every Student Succeeds Act passed, we created this webinar. It's embedded here. In the interest of time, I'm not going to play it for you, but you can absolutely find it on our website. But we created some guidance through our regional education lab to support schools on what is ESSA and how do you implement? What does it mean to be evidence-based? What does it mean to meet these benchmarks? And we continue to create tools and resources like that to help our stakeholders understand policy and how best to implement it in a manner that really harnesses that evidence so that they can have some assurance that they are working in a way that should get positive outcomes for kids. So you would think, given all this activity that we've had over the last 20 years, or nearly 20 years at FCRR, we've got research, we've got practice and policy, everything's jiving together really well, and we're making a difference as it relates to what's happening in reading here locally as well as around the world. You think we'd be in this place of this reading utopia where everything is lovely and nice and research is informing practice and practitioners are using that research to do what they do daily, and that's informing what the legislation is looking like at the state level. But at the end of the day, really we're sitting in a moment in time really public consent about what's happening with reading in schools, but in colleges of education as well, and homes as well, and professional development for teachers. More and more, you're starting to see more media become available where people are questioning what is it that we're doing around reading for our kids, because there's just too many kids who aren't reading well in school. And quite frankly, our academic colleagues aren't too happy about it either. We're just as uncomfortable. This is just an example of a few of the most recent issues of policy statements or special journal issues and other things that have been dedicated that folks are making and writing to help answer questions around what do we know about science of reading and how can we best implement that in classrooms to support children's learning. So we're seeing it happen in the public, and we're seeing it happen in our academic spaces as well. And why is that happening? It's happening because the most recent NAEP scores that have been available to us, and this is pre-pandemic, so this is in 2019, what we noticed, what we all saw and observed was that our reading scores in this nation on average for 4th and 8th graders are going down. They're trending downward for the first time in a very long time. And people are upset, as they should be. Keeping in mind that this black line that you see here is proficient for 4th graders, and this black line right here is proficient for 8th graders. So that's actually where we want our children to be. And on average, our children don't even meet proficient levels. And then when you start to look a little deeper, what you realize is it's our most vulnerable learners who are in those downward trends. So for example, these are 4th grade scores in 2019. And among all children, about 35% of kids are performing at proficient levels. But if you start to break out the groups, you notice that our Black students and our Hispanic students, for example, only about 1 in 5 are reading at proficient levels. For our students who are eligible for free and reduced lunch, which is an indicator of poverty, only about 1 in 5. When we look at our students with disability and our students who are emerging bilingual or multilingual, we're down to 10%. That's 1 in 10. So it's not just that the scores are going down. It's that we have some real disparities in our education system, so that specific groups of students are not doing as well as others, and overall as well. And then you find out that there are children in our nation, in the US, who are going to court, families who are going to court to sue school districts so that they can have the right to learn how to read. This is an article in the New York Times on a case that was litigated last year for students in Detroit public schools. And they're still dealing with the aftermath of that case there. And the question really on the table is whether or not students have a constitutional right to literacy, which in our nation, after we've gone through all we've gone through, after Brown versus Board of Education, after Civil Rights Act, the Civil Rights Act, and after the founding of the US Department of Education, and all this time from No Child Left Behind to ESSA to where we are now, how is it possible that children in our nation go to court just to have the right to learn how to read? So yeah, it's understandable if you feel like this. It's understandable if we all feel like this. We happen to be sitting in a moment right now that is frustrating for so many reasons. And I think it's important for us to hold on to that and own that, sit with that uncomfortableness that we're uncomfortable about, and start asking ourselves, what are we gonna do about that? So what's our charge in this moment to address reading? Well, I find this cartoon quite funny because I sort of sometimes feel like this guy. I'm this young new whippersnapper who's so excited about all the things that happen at FCRR, and I'm excited about where we are in reading research. And then of course I do have many senior colleagues who are like, yeah, we've been there. And I'm sure some of you have some senior colleagues who feel like we've been there before. Because weren't we here about 20 years ago when the National Reading Panel came out? Weren't we here about 20 years ago and had the same discussion? It feels like a little bit of deja vu happening to us right now, right? So what's going on there? Tim Shanahan has the blog online, and in January of 2020, he posted this blog that asked the question, why is it so hard to improve reading achievement? And within the blog, he talks about this last mile problem. And he's comparing Austin to Amazon and thinking about Jeff Bezos and Amazon, and the thing that keeps him up at night is just making sure that package gets to your door on time at the time you were promised. And so for teachers, if you make the corollary there, it's ensuring that all your kids are achieving well in school, right? That's the bottom line. That's what you're trying to get to. And he suggested that there might be a mismatch between a lot of the rhetoric that's out there right now and teachers' experiences in their classrooms, because for many of their children, what they're doing feels like it's working. And for some of their children, it doesn't. And they're struggling with how to balance that out, right? And struggling with who to trust and all of the noise that is out there right now in this very crowded space that we happen to be in to handle this frustration that we're all feeling. And what he suggests is that we acknowledge the current successes and the need to do better because the goal line has moved. And so I asked this question for ourselves, for us at Bordas Center for Reading Research, what is our last mile? We've been doing this work for the last 20 years or so to improve reading, to advance science in that way. What's our last mile? What's going to help us get to that finish line? Well, if you think about the problem for us as researchers, we have 3 problems, right? The way, and we have these problems as it relates to translating research in a way that benefits children and families for the outcomes we intended to, because it's either that we don't know, the problem is that we don't know what works, and so we need to do some basic research to figure out what to do about that. We need to understand what the problem is, and if it is something that can be changed, if it can be changed, how we can make it change. That's basic research that we do. But we also have problems associated with knowing what works, but we can't get the end user to use it at scale. So I can create something, I can create an effective intervention, to improve reading outcomes for children. But if I can't get it to be used in classrooms at a level of fidelity that would get the outcomes I might see in a controlled setting, then it doesn't really help you. It doesn't help the end user in the way that I want it to. Or maybe I can even get you to do it, but I can't get to scale. So if I get you to take advantage of this wonderful intervention I created, and you get some wins for some children in your classroom, but I don't see that for many children in many classrooms across many districts, across many schools, then I'm still not pushing that needle like we need to get to more children reading on grade levels. That's what we want, right? That requires a different kind of science. It requires some effectiveness studies and some replication studies, and it requires dissemination and implementation research. It requires us to take our research into the real world and understand how to get the outcomes we wish to achieve in those contexts. Working and doing research in those two different ways it's a different proposition for the way in which we engage our stakeholders, whether they be principals or teachers or families. Depending on how we do this research, there are partnership things that we have to think about in order to make sure we get the outcomes we want to see for the people we want to see them for. So there are times where we need to figure it out, go away and figure it out and try to come and bring you a solution. And there are other times where we need to be on the ground with you, co-creating and innovating these solutions at the same time. And that's really, really hard to do. But at the end of the day, the definition for you, if I'm gonna try to define a problem for many of our practitioners, they just wanna know what they should do to help kids read on Monday or Tuesday. Because this is all great and I understand what your issue is, but I gotta teach kids to read tomorrow. So what do I do on Monday? And what you want is this. You want me to walk in with my finest Olivia Pope jacket and just say it's Andy. You want the answer. You wanna know right now, go do this on Monday. Often what you get is inconsistent engagement researchers around getting that answer. It's hard to get us to give you a stable answer. Part of that is the nature of science. It's always changing. So our answers are going to be continuously changing. That's the way this thing works. But that doesn't help you answer that question. But maybe what we all need, and I'm going to use my best fighting voice here, we might need to lower the temperature a bit. If we can better understand on the table for all of us, for researchers, for practitioners, for families, for everyone, we're trying to make sure that science benefits. If we can figure out how to do that together, we might get closer to that finish line that Dr. Shanahan is proposing that we get to. That might be our last moment, but that's going to take some work for all of us, right? Because what we have to figure out how to do is balance improvement and innovation. Improvement is doing it better. And there are cases for which we do need to do things better. We don't need another study. We don't need to learn something else. We just need to do it better. But there are situations for which innovation is necessary, where we need to do it differently. We need to come up with a new solution because what we think works to improve something for one skill, for one group, for one scenario, isn't working for all the others. And we got to be intentional about making sure that we do that. So this is a quote that I like to use to help drive that home, but I'm sure you all have heard this before, this notion of the light bulb versus the candle. But in general, the idea is to move us from a light bulb, to move us from a candle to a light bulb, we had to have some innovation. There are times in which we had to do things a little differently to get to that light bulb. But there are times for which a candle is necessary. And when it is necessary, we should use it. And we should use it well, based on what we know. So what's been guiding our thinking about this as we help push everyone forward? I'm gonna pause for a moment. I think you might be getting a little feedback and I just wanna make sure everything's okay before I continue.
I'm sorry, Nicole, we're hearing some feedback. I would like to say if anybody has their audio on, please mute yourself because we keep hearing something. It almost sounds like someone's eating. I'm sorry to do this in the middle of your presentation. I apologize.
That's okay.
Nicole, are you, I don't know. I don't know if it's coming from your headsets. I don't know.
Okay, I can, if you give me one moment, what I'll do is take them off
Okay.
and
Okay.
make,
That, yeah, see if that helps.
okay. That might make it better for everyone. Is that better, Kim?
I think, yes, yes. Thank you. I appreciate it.
No problem.
Sorry. Right in the
This
middle
is
of
Zoom
your, yeah.
life. It's
Right.
the Zoom life. We roll with it.
Thank you, Nicole. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Okay. Let's get back into it. All right, and you are seeing presentation slides, correct? Okay. So how are we thinking about all those issues? That was a nice little intermission. We couldn't have planned it better because it got kind of heavy there. Because it is heavy and it is serious for us. It really does matter. These are the things that keep us up at night. And so what are we doing? What are we thinking about to push ourselves forward, right? Because quite frankly, we need to think about what we're doing differently too. We can't keep using the same thing over and over again if we're not getting the outcome we want. Maybe we need to think about it differently too. So this is what's guiding us as we move forward in this next iteration of FCRR. For example, we speak a lot now about translational science. This is in that same issue, we wrote a paper in, and what I want you to notice here is this paper included researchers at FCRR, as well as researchers outside of FCRR. And it included researchers who work in medical schools and researchers who work in research centers and researchers who are faculty at universities. And so we all have these different roles that we play in this world of reading research. And we really came together to try to answer this question: how do we move from taking this research evidence we have and translating it in such a way that it improves outcomes for children and families? And so we suggested a roadmap that includes these 4 pieces: balanced attention to the translational science process, cultivating translational scientists, engaging the public, and collectively communicating about a single shared problem. And so a couple of things that are important that I would bring out to the forefront here are the notion that translation is a process. It doesn't just happen. Taking a research article and turning it into a one-pager isn't the end of your translation process, right? Translation is a process that takes time, a lot of time, a lot of effort, something we think it's worth investing in. And we think as we do it, this cultivating scientists is important. We want to train the next generation of junior scholars, doctoral students, and researchers to take on the ability to do this well too. And so if we try to make sure that we're bringing up scholars in this mindset and in this way, translation should become easier. And I'm sure, as you've seen, just as we are here today, we take our role in engaging with the public very seriously, making sure that we can become available to folks to answer questions, to help them digest the things that we think the science tells us and the things the science doesn't tell us, and try to do so in a very objective way so that you can get closer to what you do on Monday. And then finally, this notion of a collective a communication about a shared problem. We need to continue to focus on the end game here. And the end game here is making sure that all children are able to read and that all children can benefit from whatever is available to us in our society to ensure that they're reading. That's all we want. Now, there are many ways to get there, and we acknowledge that there are many ways to get there, and in fact, think that there should be a team approach to making that happen, because some of that involves our skilled methodologists who help us take data and analyze it in a way that's understandable to find out if we're getting closer to helping kids learn how to read. But other times what we need is a content scholar, someone who has deep knowledge and understanding about a specific reading skill or ability or specific community context and how that matters to what's happening in a classroom, for example. And sometimes we need people who are really good at disseminating, because not everybody is really good at giving webinars, and not everybody's really good at doing Facebook Live, and not everybody's really good at going to practitioner conferences. Doesn't mean that they don't want to. Doesn't mean that they don't appreciate having their knowledge base out there in the world so people can take advantage of it.
But if we can find ways to work together to do that for all of us, then we do believe that we will push children forward in a way that gets us to that end game, which is kids reading, because it's all we really want. Formal public engagement is difficult in a crowded, controversial space like reading. But we don't only have to look at reading. We can look at the same discussion that's happening right now, for example, around climate change, which is a very controversial subject. And if you look at them side by side, you'll see a lot of similarities between how that conversation is happening in public and private spaces and how this conversation around reading is happening in public and private spaces. But what we're trying to do is keep in mind this definition that the National Academies provides us for what formal public engagement is about. And it's really about facilitating the exchange of information and knowledge to help groups that differ find common ground. Let me say that again. That just facilitate the exchange of information, knowledge, perspectives, and preferences among groups that differ in expertise, power, and values, and help them find common ground. We believe that because we sit in a university, we are particularly well suited to engage with lots of different people in lots of different spaces. Just for teachers alone, we train teachers here. We provide professional development to teachers once they move into the field and begin practicing. We provide advanced degrees, so when they come back and want to learn more, we engage with them on that side too. We engage with them across their entire careers. It gives us a certain opportunity to engage around science, but it also gives us a certain responsibility to make sure that what we produce really is a public good. Because communicating science is so important, it should be something that we try to figure out how to do well. And it's really hard how to do. There's actually research out there around how you can more effectively communicate science. And some of the things, one of the biggest things that I've learned from looking at this work is this notion that non-scientists are simply uninformed. And that's why they don't do what the research says. You hear this a lot in this current dialogue around teachers. And there are always these questions of why can't we just get teachers to follow the science of reading? Won't they just do what the science says? Well, you have to move away from this myth or this idea that people make decisions in their lives based just on science. None of us do that in our daily lives. None of us do that all the time in our professional lives, right? People make decisions based on lots of different things, their values, their beliefs, their own individual backgrounds, their own experiences, how they engage with mass media, which Facebook groups you're a part of, which Facebook groups you're not a part of. All of those things make a difference to how it is you decide what to do with the information that's coming to you, including scientific information. We've also got a lot of people communicating about science, and it's not just researchers. There are lots of different people out there who are translating research in the ways in which they understand it. And that in and of itself makes a difference to what your end user understands. And then let's not forget that we're talking about something that's pretty complex here. Reading is a human behavior. Human behaviors are complex. They're nuanced. There's a lot of if, then, and very few absolutes as it relates to human behavior. So it's always something we're going to continue to be working to know and understand better, and then be able to translate better. That's the way science works. And we've got to be better as researchers, but we've also got to be better as educators and practitioners and parents and everyone, all stakeholders involved in this, and understanding what science really is, what it can be helpful at helping us do, and how we need to continue to grow it to improve outcomes for kids. And then, of course, there's dissemination and implementation. So I can create it, I can build it, but will they come, right? I can build tools and resources that support your use of evidence-based practices. But there's also work and intention and research around thinking about how best to disseminate and implement that information. Those models are models you tend to find in medicine and public health. We don't find them very often in reading. But what if we did? Take a look at this video from the National Center for Advancing Translational Sciences. This is a center that's at the National Institutes of Health. Every time they say patient, just think student.
Every day, scientists around the globe make important discoveries and breakthroughs in understanding illness. Turning these discoveries into improvements in human health is difficult. The drug development journey costs too much, takes too long, and fails far too often. Meanwhile, thousands of diseases affect human health, but treatments are only available for about 500. This represents a challenge, but also a huge opportunity. There is tremendous need for people to discover, develop, and disseminate the next generation of science and technology to improve human health. This process is called translation. Translation is the multi-step process of turning observations in the lab, clinic, and community into interventions that improve people's lives in the form of diagnostics, therapeutics, medical procedures, devices, and behavioral changes. The field of translational science requires people with diverse skills, including biology, chemistry, computer science, engineering, medicine, and public health, to come together and work as a team in order to make a real impact. The fundamental characteristics needed go beyond individual specialization. It includes a broad understanding across the translational spectrum and being a team player, a rigorous researcher, a systems thinker, a skilled communicator, a domain expert, a process innovator, and a boundary crosser. These translational scientists are explorers working in teams, innovatively and collaboratively, searching for ways to break down barriers and improve patients' lives. Recently, translational projects have developed new medical devices, created gene therapies for rare diseases, built tools that support patients in their engagement in the drug development process, used data mining resources to advance biomedical data sharing, repurposed existing medicines to treat other diseases, and advanced drug development processes. The field is intrinsically rewarding because of the impact one can have on the science of developing new medicines and improving the lives of patients. Translational science presents tremendous opportunity for innovation and systematic change, developing solutions that make the process of developing a new medicine better, faster, and more efficient. Translational science is the youngest science with boundless promise to transform biomedical research and medicine. It requires innovative thinkers with a patient-focused approach to ensure that the patient's perspective is included in every step of the research process, breaking down barriers and collaborating to prevent, treat, and cure disease. If you want to make a real impact on the lives of millions, learn more about the field.
So you can imagine replacing every time they said patient with student. Every time we talked about a new medicine, a new intervention, every time they talked about breaking down silos and partnering across other groups to come together to come up with new and innovative ways to do this work. What if we did the same thing in reading research? How much further could we get? Because we have the same challenges that they're discussing. Many things are developed that aren't used. Lots of resources don't return on that investment that we'd like to see. And it becomes quite frustrating because human health isn't getting as better in the ways that we would like to see it. The same is true for reading. So if we could figure out how to do that together, then maybe we can push beyond boundaries that we've not quite even seen before. But just as they said at the end of that video, this partnership thing is not just a value. It's not just, I am a good partner, so let's be good partners together because I like partnership. No, partnership is a tool. You should be using it. And we should be using it to improve outcomes for kids. But that means we have to care about who's at the table when we determine what evidence is, what evidence matters, and how it might answer the questions that we think are important. There's an organization called Chicago Beyond. I encourage you to take a look at their guide. But this question, why am I always being researched, is a very important one because we often focus our research on fixing things, on solving this reading problem. And we often want to solve it for our vulnerable populations. But quite frankly, we've been doing that for a very long time. And I don't know that they always reap the benefits of what we intend for them to have. And part of that issue might have to do with the fact of whether or not they're actually at the table with us. So we're thinking about who's at our table. For example, These are elementary schools in our local district, our county. This is Leon County, Florida, and these little dots here are schools within Leon County. These are all the elementary schools in our backyard for FCRR. And what you see when you look at their data for students' reading test scores on their state tests, there are many schools in this district for whom less than 50% of students were passing the state test in 2019. And there are many schools in this district for where more than 15% of students had an IEP. There were students with disabilities that were being serviced with an IEP. And as we know, one of the most common challenges for children who are being serviced for different disabilities is language and reading. And these are the schools for which more than 50% of students enter school performing below the school readiness benchmark that has been set here. So you see a pattern here. And what you start to realize is these things that we want to understand about reading and where reading works and how it works and why it works and are things happening, why aren't they happening? If we don't pay attention to the context in which we live, in the context in which we try to do our work, we are not going to make the difference we'd like to see. So we have to think about where we do our work, and we have to think about what our role is in these places, because Florida State and the Florida Center of Reading Research sits right in the middle of this. And if we're going to be a research center whose job it is to make a difference for kids reading, we ought to be able to do that for the kids in our own backyard. So what are we doing and where are we going next? I'm going to give you very quickly some of the things that we've got going on. And I hope all of these wonderful pictures encourage you to go to our website and find out more information about the different things that we're doing at FCRR. So first and foremost, we're going to hold to our mission. Our mission is to improve reading through science, and we will do that through research, innovation, and engagement. And we will do it with a multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary approach, and we will consider reading across the lifespan. So we're going to keep doing what we do. We're just upping our game. But there's a word of caution here I'm going to give to you for that. Because when you work in this way, as it relates to research, innovation, and engagement, you have to break down your silos. You really can't just stay in your lane. The lanes are going to start to overlap. And I hope you see that as I showed you some of these examples, because the things we do for kids make a difference to the things we do for families. And that makes a difference to the things we do for teachers. And that makes a difference for the way we do our research. These things go together. And this is a quote from Ghostbusters from Dr. Spangler, one of my favorites, but I think it's very true. This hurts. It's hard to work in this way. It's uncomfortable. Right? But what happens when you cross the streams? When you cross the streams, you beat the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man, right? You solve the problem, the really big, huge problem that if you don't solve it, it destroys the world. Now, that might be an extreme example, but nonetheless, I hope my point is clear. If crossing the streams, working in this way, is going to be a learning curve for all of us. And it's going to be difficult for all of us. But if we are determined to stay focused on the mission, on the thing that we all share, which is making sure that kids read, then we will get there. So when it comes to research, we're going to continue to be a place for discoveries. We are currently working on research projects at FCRR from lots of different funding sources and lots of different partners. Some of our partners are local, some of our partners are national and international. I'm going to show you a few of these examples here that we have, but if you go to our website, for example, you can learn about the research we're doing. Dr. Lonigan and his team are doing, Dr. Lonigan, Dr. Phillips, and Dr. Schatzsnyder are doing as it relates to English language learners in the state's pre-kindergarten program. And Dr. Sonia Cabell is doing research as it relates to the core knowledge language arts read aloud program and understanding the effectiveness and efficacy of that program. We've got Dr. Stacy and others who are doing work as it relates to students with dyslexia and reading disabilities. So lots of basic research happening at FCRR so that we can continue to learn more about reading, because there is much more we need to know. And when it comes to innovation, we're going to keep being the place that pushes the field forward in ways that will improve outcomes. And we're going to push researchers, and we're going to push practitioners, and we're going to push other stakeholders as well to think about how they do what they do in new and innovative ways to improve outcomes for kids. So for example, we've got the Regional Education Lab Southeast is at Florida State, as well as LD Base. This is a project that has a very much so focus on open science and trying to figure out ways to pull data together from different learning disabilities research centers so that we can try to answer big questions about kids with learning disabilities, as opposed to questions that are just in our space. The Reach Every Reader program, for example, is focused specifically on trying to design assessments and tools that capture reading ability, as well as things associated with trauma in young children. Because if we can look at those things together at the same time, it might help us better be able to develop a response to children's needs that might be academic, but also might be most social emotional and genesis as well. So for example, the REL Southeast, briefly across the country, there are 10 of these RELs. They are regionally located and designed specifically to address the needs in their region. Florida Center for Reading Research houses the one for the Southeast region of the US. And so we work with these states to address issues associated with reading, learning and education for our stakeholders in this state. One of the things that we have recently released through our work in the REL Southeast is a professional learning community focused on emergent literacy. This is available for free on the website. You can go there and find tools that will be helpful for center directors or for principals or teachers, anyone who's working with anyone in early childhood, to help support their delivery of emergent literacy instruction according to the areas of instruction that we know are critical for conventional literacy, for the ability to gain conventional literacy skills when you move into the early grades in elementary school, including print knowledge, phonological awareness, vocabulary, and oral language. And so there are materials there available that are evidence-based that can be used to support continued learning. We also created this website last year in response to COVID. We were developing tools to support teachers to support reading at home, but we pivoted given the pandemic and created this website to house some resources that are, again, aligned with the evidence base, so families can see and understand things they can do at home to keep reading and learning happening at home. We include language that would be appropriate for families. We include demonstration videos that would be appropriate for families, and we include activities so that they can continue learning for children in kindergarten through third grade as well. We have the quantitative methodology innovation division within FCRR, and what we're doing in that division is through partnerships and the creation of different tools, we're trying to build capacity for others to produce, disseminate, and use knowledge derived from research. So for example, one of our more recently launched tools through work that's coming out of QMI is CBM at home. And so here's, again, a resource that's designed for parents and caregivers to help them understand their children's risks for developing reading difficulties. And so there's demonstration videos and resources on this site that allow parents to look into how their children are doing. And this, again, was something that was in response to COVID. There was a time period there continues to be a time period here where many families are really struggling to understand just how well their kids are doing. Are my kids doing okay? So we're developing and trying to see if this is a tool that might be helpful for families in that regard. We also have the Innovative Research Dissemination Lab at FCRR. Again, another place where we're taking the research and trying to disseminate products to targeted audiences. So for example, we have these YouTube videos of different families doing evidence-based reading activities with their kids. One of our most recently launched tools on the website is a warehouse, a resource database warehouse that you can go to for free, and you can search for different types of media that might be helpful, whether it's lessons and activities for kids, or podcasts that might be available, or one pages that would be useful, lots of different media organized in lots of different ways for understanding how to support kids and children, families, teachers, and schools as it relates to reading. And then when it comes to engagement, we're going to be continuing to be a place where you can learn and where you can partner, local, nationally, and internationally. So for example, we have a division at FCRR, now called The Village, that was developed specifically to create support and sustain research practice partnerships focused on issues that are local and close to home to us, right? So for us, a lot of the issues local and close to home is specifically focused on reading achievement, school readiness, and school success for vulnerable kids. And so we think deeply about how it is we partner with lots of local organizations here because they too are focused on improving outcomes for kids. So how do we connect them to research and evidence-based tools and programs and resources? How do we champion what it is that we want to do? A lot of times I think we come in thinking we're going to save the day with what it is that we know in our expertise and our knowledge. Oftentimes the people we want to support have many things in place. They're not looking for a handout. They're looking for a handout. They're looking for us to show up for them. So we try to find out what's happening as it relates to reading and language literacy in our community. Show up for our community. And then when possible, we collaborate. So, and usually those collaborations involve more intensive, long-term mutual relationships between FCRR and our partners to focus on the things that matter to them. So, for example, in relation to COVID last summer, we designed a summer reading program that because we anticipated the learning loss that many folks are talking about right now. But we also knew there were real issues around digital divide, and there were real issues around whether or not families had resources at home. And there could be real issues around parent and family stress. People were really concerned about whether or not the kids were just okay. So we developed this, what we did was partner with our local school district to bring books and resources home and try to understand whether or not having those books and resources home really made a difference to children's outcomes. And then of course, finally, I will say that we're partnering with our partners and our colleagues around the world because we share this challenge of trying to understand what we do to support readers. And we're working together strategically, intentionally, to take the knowledge that we have, bring it to bear on solving their problems, as well as receiving knowledge from them to bring it to bear on our problems. So we have partners, for example, at the Nigeria Center for Reading Research and Development and the National Center for Reading Intervention and Research in India. This is a new partnership, as well as even friends down under. So we're working as much as we can in innovative and different ways to take the diversity of our knowledge and skills and all that we have available to us to push forward on this issue, making sure that kids read. We really believe that by taking advantage of this diversity that we have, we will get to that. So thank you so much for having me. I'm going to stop my share. As always, you should feel free to contact me if you have any questions or concerns. As always, very thankful for folks who work with me, whether it's students, teachers, children, families. We get into a lot of good trouble together, and I hope that we continue to do stuff. So thank you. Stop my share.
Thank you so much, Nicole. I'm just testing this because those last 3 or 4 slides, we had an audio problem. You were sort of in and out. And I'm wondering if people can hear me now, if someone could just put that in the chat, if the audio from my end is working.
Yes,
Okay.
it is. Nicole, I apologize. I don't know what's going on.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start looking at some of the questions in the chat and maybe respond to some of those while we figure out the audio issue. Does that sound good?
Yeah, that sounds good. And thank you so much for such an informative.
Let's see. It looks like you all. I'm gonna answer like you can hear me. So luckily this is recorded. We'll come back if we need to. I'm gonna answer so you can hear me. Okay. So how do you ensure that schools implementing a curriculum the science of reading fully? I think that is a difficult thing to do, especially if you want to see something
often when they move into practice in the classroom, oftentimes they need this iterative process that happens to ensure that what live up to the day-to-day
Nicole, I'm so sorry. We actually can't hear you.
Early full on implementation, unless you're there to study the delicate. But they have a purpose, they have probably a reason why they're there. Really, you just want to understand whether that can see things that make sense based on what we have to understand about reading. So you want to see things depending on the context that you're in, is that working with and the needs of the children that you're working with. You want to see things like whether or not that discussion is systematic, whether or not it's explicit, whether or not if there is extending learning for kids who need extension, and whether or not modifications are there for kids who need modifications. If we're talking about reading, we want to see rich language conversations and practice. See lots of opportunities for children to engage in literature that have conversations around those extension conversations around those context of learning. We want to see learning extend outside of the classroom. Moments all day. It happens in lunchtime. Really want to see those things happening. You also want to see from the children. You know that early childhood is really important for many kids, and we want to see that happening too. So lots of things that you can look for to ensure that students are doing what we want to see. Help kids see. Yes, Dr. Dick.
Yeah, I was gonna raise my hand. We're having trouble hearing you again, Nicole. You can't hear me? Oh.
Here. What about now? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Oh, yeah, see, there you go. Well, you know, you want to have a conversation because you just have this, I could hear bits and pieces.
Well, I have promised you what I said was brilliant.
I know. I've known you long enough to know that. But I think you were talking about implementation or translation of research to practice.
Yeah, different things you might look for in classrooms to see if folks are implementing what we like to see in research. Really the general idea is that what we like, I think a few things you have to understand and consider is that implementation in a school-based setting is very different than implementation in a research-based setting. And so there will be many things you don't see. And that's partly because you're very likely still iterating and developing what it is we think we can see in those settings that will get us the outcome that we like to see for children. So instead of looking for fidelity of implementation through a fidelity implementation tool, unless that's your point for being there, and sometimes it is, but that might not be why you're there. Really, you just might be looking for key practices, right? Mm-hmm. There's this notion actually at the Cedar Center, which is at the University of Florida, and I'm going to type that in the chat so you guys can go there and look at it. The Cedar Center talks about high leverage practices. And if you Google Cedar Center and high leverage practices, you'll find it there. And those practices are specific to kids with disabilities. And there are things we can do that are high leverage practices that improve outcomes for kids with disabilities. For example, explicit instruction is particularly important for kids with disabilities. Positive reinforcement and positive feedback is really important for kids with disabilities. If we can see some of these high leverage practices happening in our classrooms, then you can have more confidence that you're getting closer to the outcomes you want to see for kids.
Thank you. Sorry to make you repeat all of that. Lisa,
that's okay.
Yeah, you have other questions, Lisa?
No, that was 100% worth it. I'm going to check out the Cedar site.
Make sure you share with everyone.
Yeah.
Well,
there were several questions that came in, Nicole, during your presentation, and you then proceeded to answer a lot of them, which I think is the sign of a great presentation. But I will give you an opportunity to maybe expound on a few of those. One of them was specific to Tallahassee area. Are there opportunities for local Tallahassee area educators to partner with FCRR as a way to learn more?
Yes, there are ways to do that, though. I discussed the village there, and that would be the way in which we would try to figure out how we can work together based on whatever your need is. There are lots of different ways in which I think we can partner together, and so we would welcome the opportunity to talk to you if you were interested in doing that. It might be, in fact, that you'll learn, at least I hope you'll learn, that we might be where you are already. We really are trying to be very intentional about being engaged in our local community through many different avenues. And so hopefully we'll run into each other if we haven't already.
And kind of related to that, I was interested, and I imagine many people in this webinar are hearing about those regional educational labs, and that you're the center of the Southeast one. So, and you gave a lot of information about that. Is there anything additional you want to add about those RELs?
Sure, I can definitely do that. And I can also, what I'm going to do is put the link for the REL program into the chat so you all can go there and look for it. And again, I'm going to send you the link for the entire REL program. You'll see all of what's happening across our RELs, and you can then look more deeply into the work that's happening at the REL Southeast. But really, the regional education labs, I like to think of them as sort of R&D shops. Our goals really are to do applied research, to provide training, technical assistance, and coaching, and to disseminate research so that people can make use of evidence to make their decisions. And we design our work and all that we do based on what we're hearing from stakeholders in our region about what their needs are. So you'll find, of course, it's probably not surprising to you if you look at the REL Southeast, because it's at the Bordas Center for Reading Research, you'll find a lot of information there related to reading, because that's a big issue in our region, and all of our stakeholders are very interested in reading. But you'll also find resources there related to teaching young children math, and you'll find resources there related to school leadership and early learning and all kinds of it, college and career readiness. You'll find all kinds of things there that are specific to our REL, but I definitely encourage you to take a look at all of the RELs, because it really is about the collective work of that program. And the issues that might be specific to a different region are often shared by our region as well. And so you can benefit from what comes from that entire program.
Thank you. And you touched a little bit on the importance of ELL learners, but there were quite a few questions, especially the pre-questions and registration, about that connection between ELL learners and dyslexia and the research in that area. Could you kind of speak to that a little bit?
I can speak to a little bit. I will tell you, I'm not an expert in working with emergent bilinguals or multilingual learners, and there are lots of people out there that are, and I will do the same. I will put in a chat a few places where you might go look to find additional information. I think if there's a big takeaway from this, and I think it is one that will be appreciated by this audience, what we know from our research on emergent bilinguals and multilingual students is that language matters. Language matters to how well children learn to read and write. And so, and two, you can harness that. You can leverage the strengths that children bring with them, with their language, to improve their reading and writing. And so there's a lot of work that has been done to figure out how it is we can harness that, right? How we can take advantage of the strengths and the gifts that children bring to the classroom with them to improve their outcomes. But there are also places where we need to know more. For example, we struggle with how to service children with disabilities who are emergent bilinguals, for example. That's really hard to do. We've made some good progress there. And again, I'm going to put down some names in the chat box and some places you can go to take a look at that. One that really stands out to me is the Meadows Center at the University of Texas, Austin, that is led by Sharon Bond. And they've done a significant amount of work specifically focused on emergent bilinguals and multilingual learners. So there's knowledge there. There's a lot of knowledge there for which we can act. There are things we can do. but it's definitely a population of students that we need to learn more about.
Thank you. And I know I'm kind of jumping all over, but
That's
we had a
okay.
whole bunch of different questions.
Yeah, maybe work for it.
Really appreciate sharing of all the resources on the free resources for teachers on the FCRR website. One specific question was, is there information and resources about dysgraphia on the FCRR website?
You know, I am not sure, but my thought is probably not very much. They're specific to dysgraphia. But again, that's probably something I can look up if and I can always based on these questions, I can send you all more links so that when you send out the presentation, you can add this to it if you like to. But no, I don't think there's much there specific to kids with dysgraphia.
One other question, do you see a connection between children with adverse childhood experiences and dyslexia or the struggling reader?
I certainly think it's plausible that for children who are struggling in areas of their life, that it's likely that if they're struggling in one area, they're likely struggling in many other areas in their life, because it's why I like to think about it in terms of vulnerabilities, that children are vulnerable to not doing well in school for many different reasons. It might be because they have a disability. It might be because they're experiencing a certain amount of trauma in their lives. It might be because they've moved to a lot of different schools in a short amount of time. There are lots of reasons why children are struggling with reading in school. But oftentimes, if you're vulnerable, those vulnerabilities can be compounding. So it's usually not just one thing you're handling in your life. You often are handling multiple things at the same time. So I don't know if they have established an empirical link between adverse childhood experiences and reading difficulty in school, specifically defined as reading disabilities or dyslexia. But I am pretty sure there is at least an association between experiencing or having difficulty at home and experiencing trauma in life and having difficulty in school.
Well, thank you. I think we've covered the majority of the questions, and as Dr. Patton Terry said, the slides, as well as all of these wonderful links and resources, because many of the questions were about expanding on the resources, will be on IDA Georgia's website following the webinar. And I can't thank you enough, Nicole, for a wonderful presentation with just so much information and that important connection between research and practice for reading. And we really appreciate that. I know that was of great interest to the audience. And I'm going to turn it, and also on such a relatable level. Thank you so much for even bringing in Ghostbusters.
You never know which Ghostbusters to do. I'm kind of showing my age there because there's a new one.
I'm going to turn it back to Kim to give a little closing information and remarks. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Definitely relate to the Ghostbusters that you put up there. And I'm showing my age, and I'm much older than you. So, Nicole, thank you again for joining us. Lots of great information about the work that's going on at FCRR and the REL, and then also, for me, lots of food for thought on how we translate what's happening, or what we need to be, the work that we need to be about getting research into the classrooms and helping our kids, making things better for our kids. So anyway, so thank you very much. We've got, I don't know if you could see all of them, but lots of comments coming in about how much we really appreciate it. So
thank you.
You're certainly welcome. And I have some housekeeping issues. So if you want to leave us now, you can, or you can just stay right there and listen in. So for those of you who are interested in a certificate of attendance, if you'll click on the Google Doc link in the chat box and provide the requested information, we can get that to you. And I'm going to give you the code. It's IDAGA 42821. Again, that's IDAGA 42821. And I believe that code is also in the chat box. I also want to take a moment to thank the members of the webinar committee. All your help in putting the webinars together, Lisa and I appreciate it, particularly marketing, registration, and behind the scenes Zoom support, none of which Lisa and I know how or to do. So thank you so much. It's been helpful. And then also we hope that you'll join us for an outreach webinar on June the 9th at 7 p.m. Entitled Auditory Processing Disorder Diagnosis, Science or Pseudoscience. The speaker that we'll have that evening will be a speech and language pathologist, Tatiana Elsev. You can find out about that event and other events that are being hosted by IDA Georgia on our website, our Facebook page, and our monthly e-news announcements. So again, if you want a certificate of attendance, please check out click on the link in our chat box. Nicole, again, thank you for all the tremendous resources. We'll make sure we load all of those on. I'll be in touch with you and we'll get things, make sure we get everything together so we can put it on our website. So again, thanks everyone for joining us, and I hope you have a great rest of your evening. Good night. See you later, Nicole. Bye.